Who else was up late last night? Yeah, I settled in with my old friend Wild Turkey. Yeah, you know,
Nice.
it's a bourbon sort of night. But, without the late tensions, right? Anyway, so whether you're elated by the results or distraught by the results, I'm glad that you're here. Again, we'll deal with the non-emotional topic of the morning. So, I do want to talk about the readings really quickly. I want to mention a couple of things that I think are important about them, and I want to get some preliminary language stuff out of the way. If I haven't already mentioned it before, have I talked about these terms, pro-life, pro-choice,
Sort of mentioned them
in the loaded language portion? Yeah. So, I hate these terms so much. I hate both of them with an ardent fervor. I think they're stupid and they're worse than useless. The reason why is because I think that this is a case of loading language in particular ways, so as to affect perception. Now, a couple of things about this. I think an important point is made in the first reading by Warren, when Warren says that people on either side of this topic seem to be suffering under the delusion that their position is so morally self-evident that it requires no justification, right? And so the recipe for this is people having unconsidered opinions, right, on either side, and just feeling again that it's so self-evidently the case that they're right, that they don't need to bring arguments to bear. And I think one of the easiest illustrations of this is pointing out these stupid terms. First off, these are not natural opposites, right? What is the linguistic opposite of pro-life? Anti-life or pro-death, right? Okay, let's do this exercise again. What is the natural linguistic opposite of pro-choice? Good, you got it the first time, so. Or not choice, I don't know what that is. Here's the thing about making arguments. This is something we should have looked at a long time ago. I'm sure we've covered it at some point. When you set out terms for an argument, then if you're being charitable, if you're a fair-minded thinker, then what you do is you try to present the other person's argument in a manner which they will agree with, right? They will say, that is a fair representation of what I think. And a good argument is the sort of argument that takes the best example of an interlocutor's position and points out some inconsistencies in it, right? If you can't beat your opponent's best argument, then you have not defeated your opponent, right? So, strawmanning their argument, that is, making a caricature of their argument that is unrecognizable to them, a position that they would not accept as representative of what they think. If you knock that over, you have not won the argument. You have engaged in a bit of self-deception. I would venture to say that no reasonable person would call themselves anti-life or pro-death. I do not think that is a fair characterization of people who perhaps wrongfully self-identify this, with this position. Or, this position since we're doing this here, right? Same thing goes for the other side. I doubt that any reasonable person would self-identify as someone who is, against life or against choice. So what is happening here? Why would someone self-identify as a pro-lifer or pro-choicer except to implicitly make the case that people that disagree with are against something that presumably everyone should be in favor of. That feels like subterfuge, right? It doesn't feel like honest dealing. It feels disingenuous, and I hate it. I think a more fair characterization would be in favor of woman's access to abortion should she deem she needs it, or opposed to a woman's access to abortion on certain grounds, right? It's a more fair characterization of what is actually at stake in the argument. And these invite you to actually share an opinion about why you think that, right? Why shouldn't a woman have an access to an abortion, or why should a woman have access to abortion? These want you to think about the matter. These close off conversation with other people. They are worse than useless. Not only that, I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to defend it. You can feel free to disagree. I think that no reasonable person is pro-abortion. Let me explain what I mean. An abortion is the result of someone having either an unwanted pregnancy or having a pregnancy which has been deemed unviable, or having a pregnancy which is going to cause some harm to the mother. No reasonable person wants to have an abortion because it means that you're in a bad situation. So, we can eschew the fringes here, and let's just talk about reasonable people. Because it's always unfair to have conversations about fringe people. Let's talk about the majority of the population. The majority of the population is of the opinion that in some cases, a woman should have access to abortion, at minimum in things like cases of rape, incest, or endangerment of the mother's life. And this is reflected in the law in terms of when we put prohibitions on abortion, right? So, most state laws, because it is a state law issue, do not allow abortions past viability, right? This would be abortions approaching the third trimester. So, I think to have a fair conversation, what we need to talk about in terms of what is at stake morally in these is not going to be helped by arguing about mischaracterizations, faulty uses of language, or diatribes against an imaginary opponent. Instead, let's be reasonable here, right? The papers present different cases. The first one argues that at any stage, a woman should have a right to an abortion, owing to some perspective about what is at stake in the issue. Because what is at stake in the issue of abortion, I actually agree with this, even though I disagree with some of the implications that the author talked about. What I think is at stake in terms of morality when it comes to an issue like abortion is the issue of personhood. And the reason why this is a sticky argument where people of good faith and equal intelligence and equal access to facts can honestly disagree, right? It's not often, right? Because a lot of times, all the evidence is just on one side of an argument, right? And in those cases, it's just intellectually irresponsible to believe nonsensical things. But when you're dealing with a metaphysical idea like personhood, and who gets granted the notion of personhood, that's sticky because personhood isn't the sort of thing that you can look at under a microscope. So, let me explain why I think that this argument can be irreconcilable for reasonably intelligent people. If you think of fertilized egg as zygote, right, is imbued with an immortal soul, right? If you think that personhood basically means being ensouled, and that you are ensouled at the moment of conception, if that's your position, one, I can't really argue against it, right? The reason why is because personhood is the sort of thing we just assume. I assume you all are a person, right? Maybe you assume I'm a person. We don't tend to grant personhood to all living things, right? We don't tend to assume that an amoeba is a person. Maybe you will grant personhood to some sort of organism with complex cognitive functions, something like an elephant or a dolphin or a dog. Or not pigs, because even though they're smarter than dogs, they taste delicious. So they don't get personhood. Dogs get personhood because they're fluffy and cute. Anyway. But if you think that personhood is the sort of thing that develops, right? Such that an embryo is not a person, but a fetus at the very end stages of a pregnancy is a person. Again, it's difficult to establish because we can have different criteria for what grants personhood. But then it becomes, the sticky argument becomes, at what point does a fetus become a baby? Or, or an embryo become a fetus? Well, that's a definitional thing. You see what I'm saying? At what point does this become a person? Because at one moment it's not a person, at another moment presumably it is a person. How do you decide when that is the case? And doesn't that have some moral implications about the termination of pregnancy? Because terminating a person is different than terminating an embryo, presumably, at a moral level. Now, how some people divide this up are, again, you have a rather extreme position, I think, the notion that an ensouled zygote, right, a fertilized egg in the embryonic phase is a full personhood, is a full person, right? Not many people agree with that, but some people do. So, this is in the case prior to implantation, so before it either passes down the fallopian tube and embeds into the uterus, right? That is a person. At 6 weeks, you have the development of the circulatory system, which means you have the very beginnings of something like a heart developing. And so you see this sometimes, people are like, abortion stops a heartbeat. Okay. A heartbeat is at 8 weeks, right? You're just having neural tissue development. So yeah, there's a heartbeat there. There's also no brain to speak of. So is a person without a brain a person? By 12 weeks, the end of the first trimester, you do have a heart. You have not just an independent heartbeat, but you have the development of rudimentary neural pathways, right? And by the time you get to roughly 20 weeks, so at the end of the first trimester, 12 weeks, this is the point at which an embryo becomes a fetus, right? And some people get all bent out of shape about saying fetus rather than baby. Okay, call it a baby if you want to. This is just a technical term, right? If you read a medical textbook, it's called fetus, that's just what it's called. I'm sorry if that upsets you. Viability means the potential for a fetus to live outside of the mother, right? At 20 weeks or less than 20 weeks, you have no chance, right? You've not developed enough to live outside the mother. At about 21 weeks, you got about a 10% chance of living outside the mother. You're still going to have major developmental issues. But by about week 24, you have a good chance of living outside of the mother, and by 26 weeks, barring some other complications, you can almost certainly live outside of the mother's womb. And again, this is where the cutoff point is for most states legally, right? That you cannot have the termination of pregnancy past viability. even at this point, right, at this point in the fetal development, you would have to deliver, right, the fetus, if you had an abortion. These earlier stages, you could take the pill and you would have spontaneous abortion, and you would not have to deliver the fetus. But over here, and this would be the case, honestly, even if you had something like a stillbirth, right, you'd have to deliver it. And this becomes an issue not just for the morality of terminating a viable pregnancy, but the longer you wait to terminate a pregnancy, the more complications there are for the mother, right? This does become a real health issue if you're attempting to abort a fetus this late in the game. So the confluence of factors, one, the issue of viability and the issue of the mother's health have led most states to say at this point you should not have abortions, barring some real unforeseen problems. So where does that leave us in terms of our discussions? Well, the first paper makes the case that what constitutes personhood is the ability to exist in a community, right? And if that's the case, then basically a fetus at any stage in pregnancy is not a person. And so you should be well within your rights to terminate that pregnancy. Anyone see any potential issues with that?
You're going with able to exist within a community. Does that include time just after birth, where it can't survive on its own?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to clarify that, does it? Or it also doesn't seem to clarify people in coma, they can't really exist inside of a community, right? Or people with devastating developmental issues, right? To what extent can they exist in the community? So yeah, this gets you out of the potential problematic nature of terminating a late pregnancy, but it seems to my mind to create other issues, because if you can divide a person in this way, then you can just as well terminate other lives, right, which do not fit that criteria. Seems overly broad to me. That's what I think is potentially problematic with the first paper. Now, the second paper by Marquis makes the case that what is problematic in terminating pregnancy in the first place, like what is problematic in terminating a life, namely murder. What makes murder wrong? You shouldn't do it. It's bad.
It's not the choice of the person to get murdered.
That's a good reason. You're violating someone's rights, perhaps their rights to continue. Does anyone know what Marquis's argument is about what's wrong with killing someone?
I think he said something about like robbing them of their future value.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So, if I murder you right now, or you murder me, then he thinks what's wrong with this is you have robbed someone of future value, right? They had some good in store for them, and you prevented them from actualizing that good. That is what is wrong with it, and then that is what is wrong with terminating a otherwise viable pregnancy for Marcus. This is why he thinks this is immoral, because maybe it's not a person, but it's a potential person. And to the extent that it would have become a person by terminating the pregnancy, you are robbing them of future value, and that makes it equally as morally problematic as killing a full person. This definition also allows for things like mercy killing or euthanasia, right? If you are suffering the final stages of a catastrophic illness, and the future which is out there for you is one of suffering and inevitable painful death, then maybe this also allows for space for euthanasia, because you're not robbing someone of future value, what What do you guys think about that argument? Yeah.
I'm generally in favor of assisted suicide, so I think it's fine.
What about in the case of, do you think though that that's what makes murder wrong? Maybe this gives you some post hoc justification for saying, yeah, I think mercy killing is okay, but is that what you actually think is morally at stake in terms of terminating a life? That their future value is what is determinative for what makes it right or wrong?
I think that might be a key part of it, but as for what makes murder wrong, I would say, I would lean more towards everyone has a right to life, rather than future value. You can't necessarily prove that someone's life is gonna be good. It's just an unknown.
I think the main component with euthanasia is also consent, in which case the fetus, if you will, can't consent either.
Yeah, well, most cases of euthanasia, right? So if you're
Right.
in a permanent vegetative state, you can't really say, terminate my life, unless, as you should all have, something like a living will, or shit happens, you gotta be prepared for it unless you want the people in your life to make end-of-life decisions for you. I think that's horrifying, so, make it clear to everyone around you what measures you want to take should something terrible happen to you. Anyway, so yeah, consent, because we've already seen consent is important, especially in terms of rights. Your rights to not have your personhood violated. Now, I'm not saying that anyone is wrong in this, but I do want to press against this. What gives you a right to life?
God.
Not a bad answer, but it has to presume that other people agree with you, right?
My
We're
answer.
all endowed by our Creator with life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? Except, what if there is no Creator? And there's that business too. That's one of those other metaphysical uncertainties that you have to just presume. There is either a God or there is no God. It has implications what you decide to think about that particular matter, but it's not the sort of thing that you can establish with a microscope or a telescope. Like personally. This is one of those things which, again, unfortunately, has legislative implications. It has pragmatic implications for actual people's lives are at stake. But I really do think this, that the foundation of the disagreement between reasonable people comes down to different sets of assumptions about metaphysical categories. And these are not the sort of things, these are the sort of things that you can have honest disagreements about, right? If you think that we're all endowed by our Creator with an immortal soul, and that's what gives us dignity and that is the foundation for our rights, I can't really argue against that, right? Likewise, if I say that personhood is a developmental process, and we ought to respect it because it's the foundation of all of our moral thinking, the presumption that we are all persons imbued with dignity, if not by a Creator, at least in terms of our collective enterprise together as a society, who are you to dismiss my argument? And if I think it's developmental, at what stage do I get to decide a person becomes a person, right? When they have an independent heartbeat, when they have some kind of neural development, which means that they can experience pain, right? Because prior to the development of a nervous system, you can't experience pain. So things like the potential pain created by terminating a pregnancy. You don't experience pain if you don't have a brain and a nervous system. You just don't, right? So it's not a good argument. You can still say it's wrong. You just can't lean upon the experienced pain of the fetus as evidence of that. Or is it viability? Is that when you have a fully instantiated person who can live without, who, can potentially live without living off of the mother, and therefore, because they are a viable person, should be treated with the same equal rights as the mother. I'll tell you another problematic thing in all of this is if you legislate against a lot of this stuff, one of the practical consequences in a lot of places that have really extreme abortion laws, pregnancies can automatically terminate. I mean, there are tons of women who have spontaneous abortions in the very early stages of pregnancy and don't even realize that they're pregnant. And you can have miscarriages at any stage. And one of the problematic things about legislating all of this, especially if you have legislation which punishes the mother should she obtain an abortion, is if you have a situation where, for reasons which are very hard to determine, the woman has a spontaneous abortion, she miscarries. A lot of times what happens is the legislature doesn't know if she did something on purpose to kill the fetus, right, because she didn't want the fetus, or if she wanted the fetus and something just happened within her body which caused the termination of pregnancy. How do you decide whether that person gets punished as a murderer or not? Because I can think of a few things which would be more traumatic than to want to have a baby, for the baby to die, and then to be punished as a murderer because of something that you couldn't control. And the other thing that makes this a sticky situation, I think, is because we have disagreements on these things, you have to decide whether you think that you should legislate against these things, or whether you say, maybe I wouldn't have an abortion, but it's not really for me to decide whether another person in a different situation gets to decide whether or not they have an abortion, right? Especially since this isn't the sort of thing that you can fully establish by looking under a microscope saying, it has a heartbeat, is necessarily a person, therefore you're a murderer if you terminate a pregnancy. Yes?
I think it's just dangerous, like whether you're pro or pro-life or pro-choice to like put some type of legislation over it, because then people who are really desperate will go to any cause to terminate their pregnancies, and it often ends up in like the lockdown and hemorrhaging.
Which, I mean, I think that is a practical implication, and obviously that's a social problem, but in terms of the morality of it, right, I think as Warren points out, that it doesn't really answer the question about whether or not an abortion itself is immoral, right? To say that people are gonna get abortions anyway, and if you don't have sanctioned abortions, people get illegal abortions, and it'll invariably lead to the death of the mother, or at least the death of some mothers, and so you shouldn't legislate against it. Well, if that's fine at a pragmatic level, if you're debating about what kind of policy choices you need to make, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really answer the question about whether or not abortions, at least in different circumstances, are immoral. And that's kind of something you have to decide, right? Because there are implications. Implications for family planning, right? And frankly, I do think that, now, again, the first paper, I think, is advancing a rather extreme position. I think that very few people would make the case for late-term abortions just because, it interrupts your vacation or something. Right? I think very few people would say that that is a moral thing. Because what the person is presuming here, I think, is that such a decision is made in a vacuum, right? And intentions are not important. I think that that's frankly ridiculous, right? I mean, if you decide, at a later stage than we would want to say is ideal to terminate a pregnancy because there seems to be some kind of, dramatic health risk involved, I think that's a morally different kettle of fish than saying it interrupts my vacation, so I'm going to. Not only that, but again, it's a rather unrealistic scenario just because, one, such abortions are illegal, and I think a healthcare professional, right, would advise against it because terminating a pregnancy that late would create more potential health risks. The problem, I think, with a lot of people saying, well, we should really ban all abortions prior to 6 weeks, which is what some people are pushing for, is that most women don't even realize they're pregnant at 6 weeks. You know, you don't even start producing the pregnancy hormone HCG, which tells your body to stop releasing eggs until 4 weeks, right? And until your body starts producing enough of that hormone, usually around 5 or 6 weeks, it doesn't even show up on a pregnancy test. So you're talking 5 or 6 weeks after fertilization, initial fertilization, and you basically have 2 weeks to figure out that you're pregnant before you lose the ability to terminate an unwanted or unhealthy pregnancy. This doesn't seem very practical. Here's the thing, and I think this is important. I feel like you can be morally opposed to abortions in general. To say that people shouldn't be using abortions as birth control, and that in the main, it does end a human life, right? Whether or not that's a full person or not, it has human biology, and left to its own devices, it will eventually develop into a person unless there's some other things. You can say, in the main, I think that it is undesirable for people to have abortions. And still say that while I would not choose to have an abortion, and I think that's morally problematic, that it's not, I don't think it should be legal, right? I feel like you can hold those two things in common, right? To say, I'm in principle opposed to abortions, but not in favor of banning abortions. And that's why I think this language is problematic. Not only that, I feel like people on both sides of this should agree on something. People who have self-identify as pro-life and people who identify as self-identify as pro-choice, I feel like they both have a motivation to reduce abortions, right? If you want to reduce unwanted pregnancy, I think part of the disagreement is about how do you go about doing that. Well, we know how to reduce unwanted pregnancies. Sex education and easy access to contraceptives. There's been dramatic reductions in abortions in first world countries. The more educated a woman is, and the easier the access is to contraceptives, I mean, you radically reduce the potential of unwanted pregnancy, and if you don't have an unwanted pregnancy, you don't have an abortion. So I feel like part of this argument is about the back end, when you can agree on the front end. I think it's silly, though, to advocate for unrealistic measures like abstinence only. Yeah, maybe abstinence is the only way to prevent pregnancy, right? But it's kind of like trying to cure obesity and starvation. I mean, yeah, it'll do it, but is that the best way to go about it? Now, I grew up in a evangelical setting, at at the height of the so-called purity movement or whatnot, and I knew all these people. I knew all these people that gave like their high school sweethearts like promise rings, and they had purity pledges and all this stuff, which was always kind of bananas to me anyway. But to a person, I'm talking about dozens of people that I knew in this community. I don't know a single fucking person that wasn't sexually active in their teenage years. Not a one of them. Because, I mean, maybe you're the special ascetic, right? Who can, you know, cull your animalistic desires. But at the end of the day, sex is a very primary thing for people, right? Food and sex. That's about what drives most people. Anyway. Yes, would abstinence prevent unwanted pregnancies? Certainly. Are you actually going to get teenagers to abstain from sex? Probably not. At least it doesn't have a very good track record. Instead, I think teaching teenagers how to have safer sex, right? Discouraging them from engaging in risky sexual behaviors, I think is helpful. Also, teaching people how contraceptives works, because a lot of times when people talk about the faultiness of contraceptives, it comes down to people not knowing how they actually work, right? The pill is very effective if you use it right. Does it entirely remove the possibility? Not necessarily, right? But I think in the main, if your concern is about unwanted pregnancies and those unwanted pregnancies leading to abortions, which I think everyone should be concerned about, right? Because again, I don't think abortions are desirable things. And I think most reasonable people would agree with that. The issue is, how do you prevent them? What's the best way of going about it? Is it legislating against it? Or is it providing access to women to have greater information and greater ease of acquiring contraceptives? It seems counterintuitive to me that a lot of people that want to stop people from having abortions are also people that are against sex education and who are people who want to restrict access to contraceptives, especially for teenagers. That seems counterintuitive to me. It feels like it's creating the conditions for unwanted pregnancy rather than alleviating them. And if you're just expecting society to go along with, you know, your idea about what is acceptable sexual behavior, then the entire history of the world is kind of operating against you. Anyway. Thoughts? Really, no one's gonna challenge any of that. Yep.
I don't wanna challenge any of it, but I just think it's important to note the difference in, I don't know, perception of it from a male's perspective to a female's perspective because of the fact that, like, it's their bodies that are going through this crazy change and it's mainly affecting them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I feel like, and I'm not suggesting you're characterizing it this way, but I've seen it characterized that people say that, say things like, well, if you don't have a uterus, you shouldn't have an opinion about this. Well, people have opinions, right? And you can't stop people from having opinions. I do think, however, that obviously you, as a female, you're much more impacted by the decisions about this, right? You just are. And so as a consequence, I'm less inclined to take the male perspective as crucial in this. In the same way in which, you know, if you grew up affluent, you can't help that you were born into a good social situation, right? And it doesn't mean that you don't have opinions about poverty. But I'm gonna be less inclined to take your opinion upon poverty seriously versus the perspective of someone who grew up poor. And it does color your perspectives. If you grew up never having to worry about having money, it's very difficult to conceptually get into the mindset of someone who grew up poor. It doesn't mean that you don't have an opinion or that you shouldn't have an opinion, and it doesn't mean that it's your fault, because again, you can't control the circumstances of your birth. But if I'm gonna find out that, if I'm going to try to have a more informed decision about poverty, I want to talk to people who grew up experiencing its effects. Same thing I feel like goes for abortion. Men can't help that they were born men. I mean, I'm sorry, and people are gonna have opinions about it, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I think it's disingenuous to act as though these things don't impact you less as a man.
By the same idea, would we now apply this standard to all elements of public policy? For example, would you only consider the opinions of gun owners on the topic of gun control, or would you only consider the opinions of business owners or wealthy people on tax policy? Are we going to apply this consistently to all facets of life?
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. But again, the same sorts of standards depend upon what is involved and what's at stake in a particular matter. So, tax policy, right? I mean, tax policy, I don't think is roughly analogous to decisions about a woman's right to choose what she wants to do with her body. I just don't know those two things are analogous.
Sure, that's fair, but are we going, I mean, someone who obviously is a higher income earner or a business owner would probably know more about tax policy and the tax code than someone that's not as well off. Or the other example, someone that's a gun owner has gone through the process of purchasing a gun, would know more about public policy and the regulations that they have to comply with in order to own a gun.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I don't know about a business owner per se knowing more about tax policy than someone who's poor. I would say that someone who is trained in tax policy, right, has a requisite training and education, is the sort of person that you would want to advise you in those particular matters. And I feel like those are situations where we do seek out expertise. And I feel like I made a similar case with regards to gun ownership, right? That it's not enough to simply exclude people from the table because you disagree with them on gun matters. If you're a gun owner, or you're someone who is opposed to guns, those are fine, but you need to be informed about all the policies and regulations relative to those things. That's why I said, you know, if you're not a gun owner, the tendency is to not be terribly informed about these things. And if you're not terribly informed about them, then it is hard to see why someone should take your opinion seriously. It's something similar to the statement I pointed to, which is when someone feels that their moral position is so self-evidently true that they don't have to form any arguments, right? This is just true. It's common sense. And the other side, they're just whatever. And so I don't have to consider their opinions because I'm the fountain of all wisdom or whatever, right? No, everyone should make attempts to be informed about particular matters. But I don't feel like being a gun owner or being a business owner is the same thing as being contextually in a situation where you are formed by conditions like poverty or formed by your biological sex. I feel like those are conditional things. They kind of form every aspect of your life. You could just as well not have been a business owner. You could just as well not have been a gun owner. Yeah.
I think everybody should have an opinion and a say on what goes on in laws, but at the same time, it's easy to not take into account what it would be like to be a woman going through something like this, when you're like not a woman going through something like that.
Well, ideally, you would just want people to have empathy, right?
Right, but sometimes,
Well, obviously, yes, it does, we don't have
yeah.
empathy. But again, empathy means I'm attempting to put myself in your shoes. But if my my experience of life is so radically different, then my ability to empathize is gonna be problematized, right? I don't know what it's like to grow up in a war zone, right? It would be silly for me to presume that I do. Does it mean that I can't have an opinion about something? Not necessarily, but again, those are the sort of things which are kind of foundational and formational to people in a way that some things are just not, right? I mean, because you could just as well say, this is a silly example, I know it's a silly example. You can't have an opinion about, SUVs if you've not owned an SUV. Well, we're creating the recipe for no one to be able to say anything on any matter, right? That's ridiculous. So again, I think a lot of this comes down to trying to find some middle ground here where people can actually have space to have a conversation. And I feel like the tendencies are to say, well, if you don't tick one of these boxes, you don't get to have a say. No, the entire purpose of us having a conversation is, if I'm a man and I'm having a conversation with a woman about something which necessarily impacts them more because of their biology, saying that I don't get to be a part of the conversation because my biology is different, I think it kind of misses the point. Now, I'm not saying anyone in this room is doing this, but I have seen people do this. No, the purpose is you have an insider's look into something, right? You can help me understand something better. And I should be generous enough and empathetic enough to listen to what you have to say and understand that maybe, just maybe, you have a better idea about what's at stake, right? Because it impacts you more. And this is just always the case. Interested parties are people that, are stand to gain or lose something. And so they are the people that are typically more informed because they have to be more informed, right? If you are a small business owner, you probably care more about tax policy, right? So maybe you become more informed about it because, tax policy changes. Maybe that means that you can't hire a couple of people that you feel like you need, or you need to fire someone, or it cuts into your bottom line and it can destroy the viability of your business. I think the goal is, again, and the reason why, again, I want to keep coming back to this, why I think this sort of language is problematic is because it cuts off these kind of conversations, right? It says you're wrong at the outset, whatever your position is, and we can't have a conversation with each other to try to find some middle ground. We can't understand each other because we have irreconcilable differences. And I feel like that's just creating conditions for ignorance in general, because you are certain of your own moral position, right? I can't be wrong on this. It's just common sense, whatever, so I don't have to listen to other opinions. But the problem without listening to other opinions is not just that you're not being courteous, right, or fair-minded, or whatever. It also means that typically, people who never test their own beliefs against something wind up believing ridiculous things because they never have someone to check them, right? I think a lot of the arguments on both sides of this are not arguments. They're just the sort of things that people say, and because they've created echo chambers where no one's going to bother to argue against them, they just let those things fly. And I think people tend to confuse policy differences with different conceptions of morality, right? Maybe we agree on the morality or immorality of some certain something, but we just disagree about policy. Reasonable people can do that. Maybe we both agree that in the main, now again, I'm just assuming positions here. Maybe we both agree that in the main, abortions are morally problematic. If not wrong, at least morally problematic. But because there's so many various factors involved, maybe you're opposed to legislation which would allow abortions, and I'm in favor of it. Maybe at the moral level, we're on the same page, we disagree about policy. Again, I think that that's fair, and I think that reasonable, well-informed people are going to come to differences on certain things, and that's fine. But it doesn't help when people become uninformed about things, or they become so certain of their own positions, they feel like they no longer have to argue for them. I don't think that's acceptable. If for nothing else, then you've given no one any reason to take your perspective seriously, right? If you're misinformed or uninformed about something, and you don't particularly care about the other person's perspective, you're not giving them any reason to listen to you, to have a conversation with you, to grant you the opportunity to change their mind. All right, we got a few more minutes. Any other comments, questions? Never end a discussion on abortion this quickly. Again, this is usually pitched politically as one of these, intractable problems, right? But is it? I mean, I feel like we probably agree on much more in these matters than we disagree. And I feel like, part of the reason why this has become so irreconcilable has to do partly with misconceptions and the language that we're beginning to use. I think the only reason people use these terms is not merely to say, this is a position I think is most viable, but it also becomes kind of a badge of honor or something, right? It's a sort of virtue signal, right? To say, this is the community that I agree with. Okay. Personally, I don't care about being part of any kind of group. I want to know what I think is most reasonable in a particular matter. I don't like sort of tribalism, which says everyone in my group thinks this, and so this is what I think. Okay, but it just doesn't seem very reasonable to me. And so I think that part of what's going on with this is just kind of, one, an intellectual laziness. People don't want to bother to actually look at the issue. But then part of it has to do with a kind of easy tribalism.
I mean, sometimes it's not laziness though, when people don't feel like their point can't be argued, because like, one of them is more like religious than the other, and when you have a belief in some religions that is like absolute certainty that can't be argued in your mind. So it's hard to like.
I'm going to state my opinion on this, which is that I disagree. The reason why is because I happen to be a religious person, and I have 2 master's degrees in theology and a PhD. I'm working on a PhD in the philosophy of religion. So I push against other religious people in the assumption that it's ever okay just to believe something without evidence, right? That you can't make an argument for something. Because frankly, to me, a belief for which you can give me no reasonable argument is just not worthy of my time. It's just not. And I think that the sort of religious belief which just says that that's what I think is my conviction, and okay, believe whatever you want to. No one's going to stop you, or no one should coerce you into believing things you don't believe. But if your goal is to try to be convincing, right? If you want to not just say, it's what I think, but you want to say, you should think it also, or other people are wrong for not agreeing with you, then you lose all standing, I think, if you don't respect other people enough to give a good reason for it. And if you don't have a good reason for it, then you should abandon it. I mean, it is, irrational beliefs are just not defensible. Because I don't think they are. As a philosopher, I just don't think that You know, maybe there were certain beliefs, like, again, personhood. When I say I assume it, what I mean to that is that this is a pragmatic belief. So this is something like what Immanuel Kant would talk about as, these are transcendental perspectives which undergird a lot of other beliefs. In other words, belief in personhood is a pragmatic belief. It makes sense because it's reasonable, because it has a universal implication. It's not the sort of thing that you should just believe just as a matter of course. It's the sort of thing which becomes defensible upon examination. I'm not trying to like. I just don't. I went round and round with someone the other day about the authority of the Bible in this regard, right? Because the person was arguing to me that they didn't have to make a case for something because the Bible said so. Like, okay, well it's fine for you to grant the authority of the Bible for yourself, but you're telling everyone in this room that they are wrong because the Bible says so. Well, not everyone in this room accepts the authority of the Bible. So, if you're gonna make a case for it, you need something else. You need to give me an argument for why the Bible is authoritative. And if it comes in this kind of circular argumentation that says, well, the Bible is authoritative because it's God's word, it's God's word because it says so in God's word, that's a circular argument. It doesn't give me anything. And it doesn't tell anyone in this room why you should believe that the Bible is authoritative. Now, for me personally, right, I'm a practicing Christian. The Bible is authoritative for me. But it is, I think it's just ridiculous to think that other people are going to just grant that and to expect other people to grant it. I think that is just arrogance and laziness. I'm sorry, you have a comment. Sorry, this is just a diatribe, I apologize.
It's okay, no, I mean, I agree with you, but that's again, like how I was raised by my parents to believe that this belief has authority over your life, and this is what you follow, because that's what God says, so that's what I was trying to say. Not that I agree or disagree with it.
Well, again, I would want to say that that's fine amongst people who agree with you, but really I don't think it's fine amongst people who agree with you. I think you should still have a foundational argument. But it doesn't give you anywhere to go if someone just says, well, I reject the authority of the Bible. Okay? You need something else, right? Or I accept the authority of another sacred text or whatever. Okay, we need some kind of way of adjudicating these two things. And I think the only way to adjudicate those two things is through rational argumentation. And that's why I say, I feel like no matter what you think, you need to have a good argument for it. If you don't have a good argument for it, then you shouldn't believe it. Or at least you shouldn't expect anyone else to believe it. Right? Maybe you just believe something. Okay, fine. Maybe that doesn't hurt anything. But at the moment you point out that you think other people are wrong, or you expect other people to believe you, then it's less than courteous to just not feel like you owe them an explanation. I mean, it's kind of magic realism, which just assumes that I can, it's just an aside, sorry. Again, a lot of this is just, now I think that all of this is defensible, and if we had time to go back and forth, but I would say, so I don't want to say, this is just my opinion, because I think I have good reasons for it, but I also recognize that you may not be inclined to agree with me on some of that, and that's fine. I do think it's worth considering, though, that if you don't have a good argument, why should someone agree with you?
I would agree that there is good, logical ways to establish the authority of the Bible, like how you were saying, but also at the same time using not the very simplistic approach that you addressed, like the person saying, well, the Bible says this, therefore it's true because the Bible is the Word of God, like circular kind of thing, but sort of like the argument of self-authentication. Have you heard that argument of the Bible where it's, I'm kind of butchering it, but you know, you probably know more because you have the 2 master's degrees in theology, but
Well, the thing is, it's very difficult to, are you talking about an argument which basically says that, the Bible is authoritative? Well, it kind of assumes the authority of the Bible, right?
it's like you determine what's the highest authority, and is it human reason alone, is it science, or is it the Word of God? And it kind of is a presuppositional approach.
Yeah, well, there's a long-standing, debate about this among theologians, about whether or not, and not to veer too far off topic, because I know we just have a couple minutes, but I will say that, in my mind, the problem with the presumption in saying that the Bible is authoritative, you just, again, you're kind of presuming, is that you could just as well make a presumption about the authority of any Christian text. And in doing that, you don't have a means of adjudicating between people who have irreconcilable beliefs about this. So you could have a presumptive approach to the Quran, a presumptive approach to the Book of Mormon, and if that's your presumption, then it's just that, it's a presumption. I feel like it needs something else. That's just my take on it. I feel like it needs to pass the test of reasonability. So that's where I would position myself. Not only, I mean, yeah, that's too big of a topic for discussion in my 30 minutes about how do you or do you not establish the authority of the sacred text. So we'll leave it for now. But yeah, it's an interesting topic. And even though, here's the thing, even if you accept the authority of the text, a text requires interpretation. And then you have to adjudicate differing schools of interpretation. So it's not just about it's not as if me as a Christian and someone else as a Christian, that it's sufficient for us to say we accept the authority of the Bible, right? Well, there's a lot of other things that have to be worked out in terms of agreeing and disagreeing on that. Because maybe we both equally accept the authority of the Bible, but maybe we have radically different conceptions about what that entails. Not to say nothing of how to interpret like really naughty text. Naughty, not naughty. Naughty text too, because the Bible's kind of dirty in places, but we'll leave that one. We'll leave that for now. All right. I will no longer hold you all captive. You have a good day. I think